Greetings, Apollo Convention. My name is Eunice Howe, and I'm president of the Seattle chapter. I have the honor of introducing our next speaker, April Sims, Secretary-Treasurer of the Washington State Labor Council. She was elected in 2018 and is the first woman of color and the first Black person to be elected to a WSLC executive officer. She comes from a union family. Because of her mother's union position at a hospital, she was able to provide for her family. She got her start in 2002 in the Washington Federation of State Employees, affiliated with AFSCME International. She has held many positions in the union, including member and shop steward, all the way up to campaign director. Under April's leadership, the State Labor Council has worked on racial justice, equity, and the labor movement's responsibility to tackle racism. I am proud to say I have marched on the bus alongside April Sims. We delegated management at a hotel in Seattle where my union, Unite Here, had a contract fight. She walked with confidence into the tiny room, addressed the manager, and then turned around and spoke directly to our members. Her solidarity boosted the workers' spirits, and we won a fair contract in the end. It will take bold leadership like hers to continue to push the labor movement forward. Brothers, sisters, and siblings, let's welcome April Sims to the stage.
Sisters, siblings, and brothers of Apollo, I'm so excited to join you all today as a card-carrying member of Apollo from the gritty city of Tacoma, Washington, which is on Coast Salish land, the traditional land of the first people of Tacoma, the Puyallup tribe. So I want to take a moment to honor with deep respect and gratitude their elders, past and present, for their stewardship of this land and its people. Mine is a legacy of stolen people on stolen land, and I lift my voice in the struggle for Black liberation and the movement for Black lives. I invite you all to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here today. Thank you. My name is April Sims, and I use she, her pronouns, and I have the privilege of serving as the first Black elected executive officer of the Washington State Labor Council, AFL-CIO. And I am proud to boast that Washington's Apollo Seattle chapter is the largest chapter in the country. So special shout out to all of the Seattle chapter members, National Secretary Tracy Lai, and National Executive Board members Lagaya Domingo and Jason Chan. And a big thank you to Alvina Ye and the entire Apollo National Leadership Team for inviting me to address the convention delegation. We are gathering today to both acknowledge the pain and difficulty of the past 18 months and to chart the course for the future we want to create together. Without a doubt, the first part of this decade has challenged us. And these challenges and struggles expose the inequities of our system, and it was working people, especially Black, Indigenous, undocumented, and other people of color who are at the forefront of all of these struggles. We see it, we hear it, and we feel it first, either personally or through our family. And we know that as people of color, our struggles are linked. But we also know the power of our movement, the collective strength of this movement that has held us and our families and our communities as we navigated our way through these unprecedented times. Now, as Secretary-Treasurer of the Washington State Labor Council, my fiduciary responsibility is constitutional compliance, which, as you can imagine, doesn't make me a lot of fun at parties. But the Washington State Labor Council Constitution calls on us, and I quote, to combat resolutely the forces that seek to undermine the democratic institutions of our nation and to enslave the human soul. Institutional racism and systemic policies that disadvantage people of color are those forces. Racism is a system of oppression designed to divide the working class so the wealthy elite can consolidate their wealth and their power at the very top. And as long as we allow racism to divide us as a movement, we are weak. We can't reach our full potential. We aren't able to unite against our oppressors. So we must recognize that the struggle against racial injustice is and must be a working class struggle in which the entire working class participates. And if we are to continue to build our movement and get to a place of true solidarity, then we have to organize. Now, no matter what title I hold, I'm always an organizer. And I got my union start coming up through the ranks of AFSCME. but more importantly, it's in my blood. You see, my grandparents were sharecroppers in rural Louisiana, and they, like the generations before them, picked cotton just to survive. And when my grandfather learned the landowner was shorting some of the families on the crop payout, he got the other farmers all riled up, like a good organizer would. But as you can imagine, the landowner didn't like that. So he sent some men to the house, and they dragged my grandfather out to the whipping post, intent on making an example out of him. Now, he escaped narrowly by fighting back and using what he always referred to as his Texas Jack, which was this knife he kept tucked inside his right boot. But he knew if they found him, they'd lynch him for sure. So he and my grandmother and the 5 children all went into hiding, and they slowly made their way to northern Louisiana, where my grandmother's family told him he could stay, but only if he could learn to keep his head down and his mouth shut, because they didn't want that kind of trouble around there. And my grandfather knew he couldn't raise his family with any dignity in the violent and segregated South. And he dreamt of a better life, not just for him, but for his children and his children's children. So he left my grandmother and the family and the safekeeping of her family, and he migrated to Washington in search of social and economic justice. And here, for the first time, he earned a fair day's pay for a hard day's work. He was able to save enough money to send for the family, buy a house in the Central District, and he lived a life of dignity with his head held high. And when I think of my grandfather's story, I wonder if things might have been different had there been some white men around who had the courage to speak up and speak out for the Black workers, because all of their struggles as workers, as sharecroppers, were linked. So when it comes to building multiracial working class solidarity, we have to organize, y'all, and we have to come together, because if our struggles are linked, so too is our liberation. And I'm proud of the work happening in Washington between APALA and the other constituency groups to organize together and to stand in solidarity with one another. They even spent some time unpacking the model minority myth, a phrase coined in 1966 to divide people of color, ascribing positive virtues to some groups in an attempt to define which minorities are good and which are bad, and ignoring the reality of our shared oppression and the systemic racism under which all people of color continue to suffer. These conversations and the work that follows need and must happen throughout our movement if we are to fight capitalism and its greed. The work to dismantle racism does not fall on Black people alone. It falls on all of us, because our struggle and our liberation is linked. Now, as we emerge from this pandemic, I imagine what's on the other side. We're in the middle of a moment that will shape our futures and our children and our children's children's futures. This is a moment for working people, and it's our moment to seize. Working people are walking off the job, striking, demanding more from their employers, showing up for their communities, and winning at the bargaining table every day. It is our charge as leaders to build a more inclusive labor movement, the kind of movement that all working people want to be a part of, whether they're in a union or not. We're at a crossroads. We either cross together or we don't cross at all, because our struggle and our liberation is linked. Now, as APALA members, I charge us all at this convention to continue to show up for Black lives. Your history and your actions prove your commitment to this work, because we all know that no one's free until we're all free. And I believe in the power of working people to organize together to create a world where true justice is attainable, because we don't do this alone. Our solidarity is our strength. And whenever I need to be reminded that this is possible, I think of tiny Melinda May. So I want to leave you with her story today. Have you heard of tiny Melinda May, who ate the monstrous whale? She said that she would, she knew that she could, so she started in right at the tail. And everyone said, "You're much too small," but that didn't bother tiny Melinda at all. She took little bites and chewed really slow, just like a little girl should. And in 89 years, she ate that whale because she said she would. The struggle for racial and economic justice continues. It is our collective fight. And no matter how long it takes, as people of color, our struggles are linked, and so too are our solutions, and so too is our liberation. And that is where our work has to start. That is the tale. So thank you for the privilege of speaking tonight. Have a wonderful convention.